Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the YMyHealth podcast. My name is Julie Woon, and I am today's host. And we are joined today by a guest who is a licensed mental health counselor whose work is deeply shaped by her own lived experience. After navigating long periods of loneliness, she found therapy to be a transformative space where she finally felt seen and heard, an experience that ultimately inspired her to create that same sense of understanding for others. She holds a master's in mental health counseling and is licensed in New York State and is certified in ADHD clinical services. Her work focuses especially on women in their 20s and 30s and offers a thoughtful, holistic approach to mental health that honors the complexity of each individual. And in today's conversation, she joins us to share her personal journey about being diagnosed as neurodivergent, what that looked like, what it changed, and how it shaped both her life and her work as a therapist. So welcome to the show, Bailey.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
We are really excited to have you on the show today. I think neurodivergence is something that's been talked about a lot online, increasingly so for people of all ages. And it's something that I know our listeners are particularly interested in. So we're really excited to hear more about your personal story, as well as a little bit about just like mental health and neurodivergence. So maybe we can start with the first experience in therapy that really made you feel seen and heard. Can you take us back to that moment and explain why that was so impactful?
Yeah. I can't remember the exact context. I mean, it's been years. Uh, but I do remember when I was in college, at this point, I had been in and out of therapy since I was like 9 years old. But it took me getting to college and really coming face to face with an eating disorder that I had been struggling with for many years. And I finally had this like epiphany moment and I remember calling my therapist and being like, we need to talk. I've been lying to you. I've actually been practicing this eating disorder. And I haven't been honest. I haven't told you this, but like, I really feel like I need to talk about it now. And I feel like I'm finally ready to talk about it. And, and it was then that we were able to finally, I think, like connect on a deeper level because I was finally able to be more vulnerable with her. And in that moment, we were also finally able to address a lot of the trauma I had experienced throughout my life at that point. And when I finally opened up and we finally really talked about the trauma and the eating disorder and how everything was like very interconnected, I just remember her pulling out this like giant whiteboard and she like drew me and my family system. And she was talking about how things can exasperate, impact, relate. And I just remember looking at this visual and feeling and everything she was saying was so extremely validating. And that was the moment. And so I'll always like remember the stick figures
Yeah.
and just that like pure validation of like, oh, maybe I can be seen, maybe I can be understood. She does, like, I feel so overwhelmed with emotion because for the first time I feel like someone is seeing me and not labeling me as all of these other negative messages I had received throughout my life.
Yeah. And you're both a counselor and someone who is neurodivergent yourself.
Yes.
When did you first begin to understand your neurodivergence or recognize something? And when did you get diagnosed?
Yeah. So it's a little bit of a complicated story, but I'll try and keep it brief. But again, going back to I'd been in and out of therapy since I was like 9 years old. And so I got diagnosed with ADHD at the age of 17. And what helped me figure out that diagnosis was I'd gone through years of trying to treat anxiety and depression and nothing working. And still feeling like there was something wrong with me that I couldn't figure out what was going on for me and feeling like everything that I was trying wasn't working. So I actually had a best friend. It was like super late at night. She sent me this article of this research that had just come out about ADHD in women. And I remember reading it and I was like, oh my God, it's describing me and my experience. Like this is what my life feels like. And I took that article and I was like, I went to printed it out, highlighted all the sections, and there was a piece that had stood out to me that like ADHD is heritable and genetic. And I have I'm one of six.
Wow.
I have a really big family. And one of my older brothers had been diagnosed with ADHD in childhood. Mind you, he's like 12 years older than me. So I was like, like it, okay. So I do have a family history of ADHD, which is kind of what the article was saying. Like typically there's a family history, blah, blah, blah. This is what it looks like in women. And I printed it out, highlighted it, brought it to my doctor. And I said, I think that anxiety medication and all this treatment for anxiety hasn't been working because I don't think I'm anxious. I think I have ADHD. And my doctor was like, all right, like, let's try medication. And I was like, cool, I'm ready. And I remember taking the medication and like the brain fog lifting. And all of a sudden, that anxiety that I had felt, the racing thoughts, never feeling like I could catch up with my thoughts or hold on to a thought or always worrying about what I was going to forget, went away. And it was like my brain was silent. And I was like, is this what it's like to like feel awake, not be bogged down with this like immense heavy brain fog and to be able to think clearly for the first time? And I was like, this is amazing. And so when I reported back to my doctor, he was like, yeah, you definitely have ADHD. But fortunately, we all go through different life experiences.
Yeah.
I was 17. I was about to graduate from high school. I graduated from high school. I started college. My college was like a 45-minute drive away. Stimulant medication, still, it's a little bit easier now to get refills, but at the time, I would have to drive home every once a month to go pick up a script from the doctor's office, then to take it to the pharmacy, wait at the pharmacy for it to get filled, pick it up, and then take it home. And, ADHD is executive dysfunction. And so I got to a point where I was too busy with college, too busy working, because I
Yeah.
worked full time throughout college, that I stopped taking my medication and I just like wrote it off. And there was also like so much stigma still, and no one really educated me on like how much medication could have like really helped me in that time of my life. I mean, looking back, there were signs, girl. Like I changed my major my first year of college, no joke, 8 times. I'm not kidding. 8
Yep.
times. Yeah. I was like, there were signs, but, life is gonna, I feel like it, even though I would have really benefited from some psychoeducation and knowing like the importance of taking the medication and how much it could have helped me in that period of time, there, I went through what I went through,
Yeah.
and, I graduated college, took me a little bit longer, started working, moved to New York City, started working, and realized that corporate America wasn't for me. And I was like, I don't think I like this. And I think there's something else I want to do. And I kept coming back to that, like, ultimately, I knew what I wanted. Even when I was going to college, is I wanted to help people. And I knew that I really wanted to help people feel less alone in the world. And I really knew that I wanted to help women connect with themselves, have better relationships with themselves, and that there was, and to love themselves and to love their bodies, etc. Right. I'd gone through a lot of healing with my disordered eating, and I just felt like there was this like pull. And so I spent like 2 years post college trying to figure out what direction I wanted to go and how was it that I was going to make this like impact on people who I felt like were probably different like me, but I didn't have the words to describe how I was different at the time. And I finally realized like maybe I actually can go to grad school and become a therapist. And that there are other alternate routes besides just becoming a psychologist, or a psychiatrist, or a social worker to become a therapist. And through some like research, I finally landed on mental health counseling. And I was like, that's the path I want to take. And so I applied for grad school, started grad school. And after my first semester of grad school, my emotions, it was like a roller coaster. School was really important to me, but I always felt like school was really scary. It was really scary to go back to school because of like challenges with my executive functioning, like working memory, task initiation, being able to I've always struggled with studying, a lot of test anxiety, and in my emotions because of the stress. It was just they were really intense. And I finally sat down with my now husband and we had a conversation. I was like, I think it's time for me to go back on medication for ADHD.
Mm.
And so after a few conversations, I did. And I remember taking the medication, took it, and I was like, why did I stop this? This is,
Yeah.
oh my God, life changing, major life changing. And so that really helped me get through grad school. But it wasn't until and throughout grad school, I started to notice that there was even in our education system for becoming therapists, there was a lot of stigma around ADHD that I really didn't understand. But I had stigma about ADHD before I went back to grad school. I totally rejected it in myself. And it wasn't until after that first semester and learning more about ADHD that I was like, I really don't think I can ignore this. I think I actually need to address it, do something about it. And but as I continued through grad school and then post grad school into my provisional license and working towards licensure, I really started to notice how big of a stigma there was on ADHD, especially ADHD in women.
Hmm.
And then there was that same friend who sent me that article years ago about ADHD in women. And she sends me this podcast one day and she goes, hey, can we talk? And I'm like, yeah, why did you send me this podcast? Because the name of the podcast was Inside the ADHD or Autistic Brain. And I was like, okay, weird. Sure. And at this point, I had started making content a little bit here and there. I was experimenting with it. I was nowhere where I'm at now. But we got on the phone and she's like, hey, so my therapist thinks I might have ADHD. And I was like, ah, interesting. Um, okay. And she's like, I think you need to listen to that podcast episode I sent you. Cause I listened to it and I relate to a lot of it. And I just I want to hear your thoughts on it. I was like, all right, cool. So I listened to it and it's a podcast hosted by two psychologists in Australia and they're incredible women. One of them is late diagnosed autistic and the other one is neurotypical. And I was listening to the podcast episode and I was like, wow, I relate to a lot of this. And I called that friend up again and I was like, I think I might be autistic. She's like, I think you might be too. I was like, there's a lot of things that are starting to make sense now. As to why I still felt so different, even with an ADHD diagnosis, there was still a piece that always felt missing that I couldn't put words to. But I realized that my experience compared to a lot of women who just had ADHD, I still was an outsider. I still didn't quite fit
Hmm.
in. And that felt really confusing. And I never understood why. I was like, okay, is it trauma? Is it do I not ADHD well? What's going on here? And it wasn't until I started understanding autism in women that I was able to put the pieces together. And then through a lot of self-evaluation as well as an evaluation, I was able to identify that oh, that's because I don't have just ADHD going on. There is also this other piece that has been completely missed. And so I received that diagnosis. I'd been exploring it since I was 28, but I received the official diagnosis when I was 30.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I think from what I've seen as well online, this commentary, it is that women are diagnosed so much later in
Yeah.
life with these. Um, and I want to talk a little bit, maybe to take it a step back for listeners who this is maybe just a little bit newer to them. How do you define neurodivergence and what are some of the common forms that you see? I know we've talked about ADHD, we talked a little bit about autism,
Yep.
but to take it back to basics.
hmm Yeah. So if we were to go back to basics, neurodivergence, so we can look at this word. It has lots of different ways of being said and framed. But if we look at the word neurodivergence, it's literally just an umbrella term for brains that process differently from what's considered the norm or the majority, which we call the majority neurotypical. Um, Things or challenges that fall under this umbrella it includes ADHD, autism, dyslexia, OCD, and a couple others, like lesser known difficulties like dyscalculia, which is like, it's like dyslexia, but with numbers.
Interesting. I hadn't even heard of that before.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. So it's not like when we think of neurodivergence, we're looking at it as not a deficit, but just a different neurological profile.
yeah,
So we oftentimes see like the word neurodivergence and then the word neurodiversity. And neurodiversity is a term that was coined to just state that there is a natural variation in the way that human brains process, see the world, work in the world, etc.
got it. And we just touched on a little bit that a lot of people associate neurodivergence mainly with like childhood diagnoses. And you do see that skew a little more for men. Why are so many adults, especially women, starting to receive these diagnoses later in life?
I always get really excited for this one. Oh my God. Could I talk about this forever? So, there are so many reasons why we are seeing women be missed and women be diagnosed later. Sadly, the easiest way to explain this is that, well, majority of our research on these neurological developmental disorders was on little boys because they gave the most prominent examples and exhibited the most prominent behaviors in childhood compared to women and girls. And this can be better explained due to the way that we socialize boys and girls when we're children. And we're starting to see more of the so that's one part of it. Okay, and I'm going to circle back to that. The second part of it is we are starting to see later in life diagnosis because prior to 2013, you had to have a childhood diagnosis, and if you saw a diagnosis in adulthood, good luck. You weren't going to get it. It's a childhood disorder. If you don't get diagnosed in childhood, you don't have it. Post 2013, we realized, oh, people don't grow out of these. And we've missed a bunch of people because of what we were studying, what we were looking for, how we were assessing, and we've left out this entire population, which is women. And unless women were presenting in the typical presentation that was what little boys presented in, we were missed. And so post 2013, we're allowed to do adult diagnosing. Now we recognize that like there is this whole, well, multiple generations really of people who have been missed because we weren't looking at it through a larger lens, a wider lens. We were looking at it through a very narrow lens that was not inclusive of other experiences and of diversity, really. So
Yeah.
I know it's a big buzzword right now, diversity, but diversity is really important
Yeah.
especially when it comes to understanding neurodivergence and ADHD and autism in women and girls. So going back to that socialization piece, the reason why women and girls tend to get missed as well, there's like a couple factors here. It's like socialization, but then it also has to do with our hormones, which is a huge area
True.
of my like specialty. So when we think about the socialization piece, women and girls, like we're taught from a really young age to be helpful, to sit down, to be quiet. We're more socially motivated because that social motivation is placed on us a lot earlier than boys. Like you hear it all the time, like, oh, boys will just be boys, like they're just gonna roughhouse, they're just gonna play, they're just so
Mhm.
rambunctious, they have so much energy. And girls were told, like, why don't you go play house? Let's do this puzzle. Oh, you're such a little artist, let's paint, right? So we are naturally kind of like naturally, socially given these quieter activities that influence the way that we start to think about, okay, what is it that I need to do in order to be considered a good girl, to be liked, to be accepted, to not be reprimanded or get in trouble by authority figures, but also to be accepted by my peers, right? And so we develop strategies early on to mask our symptoms. Now, here's the other piece that goes back to this 2013. Prior to 2013, we also thought that you could only have either ADHD or autism. You couldn't have both. And they were considered exclusionary criteria for one or the other. But post 2013, what we actually know now and what we realized, and which is why this has changed, is that oftentimes ADHD and autism are actually co-occurring. So there's a component of executive dysfunction in autism, as well as like ADHD is executive dysfunction. Um, but typically they would better explain executive dysfunction and autism as just traits of autism rather than seeing it as like, oh, it's autism and ADHD coexisting. But when we have the combined type, oftentimes what happens is because they're these like two differing, conflicting neurotypes, is they mask one another
Mhm.
really easily. And so sometimes autism can take over for ADHD and say like, no, 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 I got this. Uh, I don't need you right now. We have to stick to this routine. But then ADHD comes in and gets really upset and dysregulated and is like, I can't do it. I'm burned out. I can't do the routine anymore. And autism is like, but I can't not have a routine. But you get someone who looks like they can like stick to a routine and they're so dedicated, but internally they're at war with themselves, constantly struggling, constantly feeling like, how do I maintain this? I don't think I can maintain this anymore. I'm so burned out. And then they fall off and then they come back, right? It's a circle.
Yeah.
It's all really relating to one another. But because they mask each other, it's really easy to also miss it. And then there's the hormone piece, which is that estrogen, we now know, is a neuropathway primer. So it's a neuroprimer, which enhances our brain's ability to produce and use dopamine. So, as girls age, this is why we see a lot of later diagnosis in women and girls, is as we age, our estrogen declines. So, our ADHD seems like fine and we managed it well in childhood. But then as we age and we start getting that drop off of estrogen, our executive functioning really struggles and becomes more exasperated. Whereas,
Mhm.
on the other hand, for men and boys, part of the reason why they thought it was just a childhood disorder is because as boys age, their estrogen increases. And so as they start getting access to more estrogen, their brain is using the dopamine a lot easier and their ADHD seems to like not be that bad.
Mhm. I'm curious now, based off of your experience, um, what are some of maybe the subtle signs of neurodivergence in people, especially women, that are maybe overlooked or misunderstood for somebody who's wondering, maybe this could be something that's, relevant to me?
Yeah. So this is not like an exhaustive list, but some of the things that I think about and I look for is um how well are they maintaining systems? So, especially when we're looking at like the crossover, right? Like the dual diagnosis, if I were to just like suss out and just look at the ADHD, um, I I'm looking for someone who was considered like a dreamer when they were a kid, like really imaginative, creative, but also someone who would frequently just like go into their own little world in their brain. And we see that as like signs of inattentiveness. Someone who I love this question because it's actually like on the ADHD adult assessment, but so many people don't understand this questionnaire because I really do think the questions on this assessment are like super misleading. But someone who experiences like chronic racing thoughts, but they're racing thoughts that are not necessarily related to anxiety. It's just like all these thoughts happening all at one time. Sometimes they're like things of like, oh, shoot, like I can't forget this thing, or I forgot that thing, or I need to remember this thing, or like, what about this thing? Or they have like all these fleeting ideas
Mhm.
but have a hard time grasping and sticking with something. There is the component of like, how well do you sustain your attention? And here's where ADHD gets the name ADHD is very misleading because we call it ADHD, which stands for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. But really, it's not a deficit in attention, it's a dysregulation in attention.
Yeah.
Right. Other things that I look for especially in girls is like some subtle signs like chronic exhaustion after socializing, a lifelong sense of being or feeling or being told that they're too much or not enough or overly dramatic, difficulty with transitions and unexpected change, And a really big one in ADHD and autism is this like emotional dysregulation that is mistaken for them being like hypersensitive. Um, and what is their mental health history? So looking at like, because oftentimes we're misdiagnosed with anxiety or depression or
Mhm.
a personality disorder first, or bipolar disorder because of the emotion regulation. So I'm looking at like, is there a trigger that is feeling the anxiety or the depression? And typically the triggers that are feeling the anxiety is like, I just can't remember. I'm always forgetting. And I'm so overwhelmed with all the things that I have to remember and all the things that I have to do. And at the same time, I'm really struggling to start the thing that I need to do. And it's making me really anxious because I need to get this done and I can't get it done. And I don't know why I can't get it done and why I can't start it. Right. And then under the depression is there's typically signs of like, I'm so upset and frustrated with myself. And I feel so much shame at my inability to like finish something, to start something, to maintain something, um, et cetera. And then when it comes to like the personality disorders or the bipolar disorder, and we're looking at the emotion dysregulation, what's triggering them, triggering, excuse me, the emotional dysregulation, right? What is causing this individual to be sensitive? Is there trauma underlying it, and or and usually there is a lot of trauma actually,
Mhm.
um, but looking at how long is the emotion dysregulation lasting? Is it quick? Is it feeling out of body? Is it feeling like I don't know where that came from, but like I just became so dysregulated and I felt like I couldn't control myself. And then I snapped out of it after like an hour or two. And like that felt so weird. And now I'm like feeling really anxious and dysregulated over that dysregulation and like not feeling like myself. That's usually the things that I look at to identify like, I think there might be some missing. We're actually missing the neurodivergence that's happening and we're mislabeling it.
Yeah. And what are some of the emotional mental health impacts of going, you know, years, going into adulthood without understanding your neurodivergence? What are some things that you see with patients who have had that experience?
A lot of chronic shame and self-blame,
Uh,
a lot of identity being built around being the problem. Um, and there is this like component of like self-rejection. Um, so a lot of the reframe that I do with a lot of my clients, because oftentimes they come to me and they go, I just don't know what's wrong with me. And the reframe I work on with them is that it's not that there's something wrong with you, it's that everyone missed what was going on for you.
mm, yeah.
But that like deep loneliness and isolation of feeling like no one understands me.
Mhm.
I must be the problem. I have to fix myself. And I also like can't accept myself because I must be the problem, right?
Yeah, totally. I am curious to, because you specialize in working with individuals who are neurodivergent. What does neurodivergent affirming therapy look like? How does this maybe differ from therapy for somebody who is neurotypical?
Yeah, yeah. In my mind, neurodivergent affirming therapy is a holistic approach. And so I've developed my approach based off of, what are the unique needs of that individual client, but also how can I create this space to be more affirming and understanding and less pathologizing in the sense of like we're deconstructing systems that have not worked for you and we're going to be creative and creating a space that is more supportive for you. And we're going to look at the systems that we're operating in and we're going to identify and figure out how has the system kept us in this perpetual state of shame and like you're the problem when really, really you're not the problem. So in my practice, I'm a fully telehealth therapist. So everyone's a little bit different, but I think neurodivergent affirming therapy needs to be inclusive of understanding the trauma that comes with being neurodivergent, because there is a lot of trauma
Mhm.
with that neurodivergence. Is being chronically misunderstood for majority, if not your entire life, that is traumatic. And there's all these other little traumas that we experience throughout our life, especially with like not understanding things, like our own misunderstanding, not understanding social cues, not understanding jokes, not understanding. There's like this like naiveness that kind of comes with it sometimes, of like we want to see the good and think all people are good, and then like chronically being hurt by people. That's really traumatic and really traumatizing. So, um, I always acknowledge and address the trauma in the room. But I also try and create, more than just like my therapeutic approach with being trauma informed, and understanding the neurodivergent experience and holding space for that experience without telling my clients that they're wrong or that they did it wrong or that they're the problem, but helping them understand the system that they're in, is creating a space that allows them to show up in a way that is the most supportive for them. So I actually love being a telehealth therapist for neurodivergent individuals, because it gives my clients the opportunity to set up their therapy space where they want and how they want it to be. My rule is that I have two rules. You got to be alone, like you got to be in a safe, private space. That's just for HIPAA reasons. And then I got to be able to see you.
Mhm.
Um, Otherwise, I invite my clients to bring things like fidgets. I invite them to bring stuffies, their special interests, weighted blankets, water, tea, snacks. If they need to fold laundry because they've been putting it off and like they need something to do while we're chatting, do the laundry, whatever it is that is going to be. Want to go for a walk? Go for a walk. As long as you feel comfortable chatting with me. Obviously, I stay operating within like the ethical boundaries, which is why I have my two rules, which is you got to
Yeah.
be in a safe, private space, and I got to be able to see you. Um, but I also do EMDR therapy too. I'm EMDR trained. So, uh, again, with EMDR, I take a little bit of a less traditional approach. And again, I allow my clients, if we're doing eye movements for EMDR, they're allowed to like have something in their hands if they want a fidget, something to play with while we're doing EMDR. If they want a stuffy, I keep saying stuffy because I hear it all the time, and my niece and nephew are in the back of my head. And they're
Oh, yeah.
little, really little, so they call them stuffies. Um,
That's cute, though. I love that. Yes, stuffed animals,
yeah,
whatever your comfort creature is. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. And then we also play around with like different forms of EMDR, whether it's eye movements, sound, or tapping. Really working with them to find what is the most supportive for them, as well as like some people need earplugs to block out excess stimulation so that they can focus on the EMDR session. So, really just making sure that I'm meeting my client where they're at and creating a space that they can really unmask and feel safe and comfortable in.
Yeah. And how has your experience influenced your therapy style?
Hmm. Only laughing because I love to say that I'm fueled by anger, motivated by anger. So I would say that my therapeutic style has heavily been influenced by things that other therapists have either done to my clients or to past clients, or things that I've experienced myself from medical professionals or other therapists, et cetera, psychiatrists. And it's my kind of like, in a way, F you to them. But also like, you guys are failing people, and I'm determined to not fail these people.
Yeah.
And so it's all of those people who have been failed, all the people who have failed me. I've turned around and I said, I'm gonna do better.
Yeah. I mean, anger is an amazing motivating factor and like absolutely something that can be turned around and used for good. So I think that's great.
Yeah.
Um, for somebody who um, is looking for a therapist who understands neurodivergence, what would you recommend? How should they start looking?
Yeah. Well, I think there is like an amazing age of social media. And I think that there are some really incredible neurodivergent affirming therapists on social media, but some really great websites that I like is ndtherapists.com, or there's chad.org, but I really like ndtherapists.com. But also like looking at social media, I think it's also getting curious about what it is that you would feel would be the most supportive for you in the therapeutic setting. Um, but I think it's totally fair. Most therapists should and do offer 15-minute free consultations. And during that consultation, I think it's really important for them to also interview the therapist back about like how do they actually view neurodivergence and what is their understanding of neurodivergence, because there is a lot of therapists and psychiatrists who say that they understand ADHD and work with ADHD and autism and OCD, and when you really start working with them or talking to them, you realize they really they have a general understanding, but majority of the time, even that general understanding is not enough for them to, like, really understand. So, I think, like,
Yeah.
if one of my red flags is if you start working with a therapist who says that they work with ADHD or autism, and you bring up ADHD and autism, and they go, "Well, we need to treat the anxiety first, or we need to treat the depression first,"
Mm.
red flag. Because majority of the time, like 99.9% of the time, I can't say all the time, but majority of the time, it is the inverse. We need to treat the ADHD, treat. We need to work with the ADHD and the autism and the OCD in order to relieve ourselves of the anxiety and depression. Because what's underneath the anxiety and depression, what's driving it, is the unresolved, unacknowledged, really, because we're never going to really resolve it, but the unacknowledged neurodivergence and the unresolved trauma of having that neurodivergence and not knowing, and or knowing but it being dismissed.
Yeah. And what role does community or peer support play in mental health for neurodivergent people?
I think communities are really important. This is also, I think that social media gets a bad rap, and like, don't get me wrong, I think everything in moderation can be really good. But what I have loved over these last, I guess it's been 6 years. Where does time go? Really, since like 2020, I feel like that's when I really started to notice that people started talking about being ADHD and autistic online, and community helps us understand and realize and know that like our experience, while unique, we may not be as alone in the experience as we might think we are. And so, community, especially neurodivergent community, can be so healing, and being able to identify with other people. And again, it removes this like responsibility of I am the problem to like, no, everyone, this system is failing me, and it look at all the people it's also failed. And maybe I'm not the problem, but it's the system that's the problem. And there's other people who I can relate to, who can hold space for me, whom I can also hold space with. And there's a lot of healing that happens in relationships. So community is everything. Community to help us with advocacy, community to help us learn and understand ourselves, but also build that self-acceptance and that self-compassion, while also providing and giving that acceptance and that compassion to others who are like us.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've seen time and time and again all of those to be so true. We just came off the back of our colon cancer awareness month, and advocacy is such a big part, and social media plays a huge role in that. So I think that's absolutely great advice. What is something you wish someone had told you earlier in your mental health journey?
I don't know if somebody could have told me something earlier, because I think that everyone who I worked with was doing the best that they could with what they knew.
Yeah.
And I think they all had really good intentions. Although I do think about this one psychiatrist who did an evaluation on me. And I remember sitting there and trying to explain my experience and her being like, "So it's this." And I was like, "No." And she's like, "Well, that's what it sounds like to me." And I was like, "But that's not okay."
Mm.
That was really terrible. But when I think about like what is something that someone had told me earlier is I don't know if it's necessarily that I wish that somebody had told me something earlier, or if I wish that people had slowed down enough
Yeah.
to understand me without brushing me off or telling me what it was just because I was a child.
Hmm.
What I'm really grateful for is that even though it took a long time for me to figure out and understand in myself what was going on for me, is that there was a lot of support and that my mental health journey was never looked at as something negative,
Hmm.
but always as something that like especially my mom, um, really encouraged that I take care of myself, and it was never weaponized or seen as like something bad or like why would you go seek mental health
Hmm.
services. And so I do think about like all the people who are afraid to seek mental health services, and I think it's okay to like try and find those answers for that deeper self understanding and knowing that we're not always the problem, that
Yeah.
there's typically most likely something else that's going on or a system we're in that is not working for us.
Yeah. And what does taking care of your own mental health look like now as a therapist?
Oh, yes. I think mental health and physical health go hand in hand. And so things that I really love doing over the last couple of years, I've really gotten into Pilates. Being neurodivergent comes with a lot of co occurring um, disorders like hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which I have. And so Pilates has become like a new love for me for like taking care of my body and my joints. I really just like love fitness, physical therapy, my own therapy. Um, I really love traveling. And so, like, doing things to engage with my special interests, which is like travel and understanding other cultures. And I just love learning about like why people are the way they are and how communities and systems develop. So, engaging in that like is always really fun for me. So, you can like 9 out of 10 times can guarantee I'm probably looking up a place and reading all about it and figuring out how the heck I'm going to get there
Yeah.
to go experience it. But then also knowing my limits around my my schedule, my caseload, how much work I'm taking on, um, and and my own community, connecting with my own community, and taking lots of time for whatever rest I need.
Yeah. That's great. We've done a few episodes on EDS. And so if you haven't listened to those, scroll back in the feed because we've got a bunch there for people who want to learn more about that. I want to, as we kind of start coming to the end of our conversation, talk about, you know, some empowerment, some hope for people who may be experiencing this. For somebody who feels like they've always been different, but maybe can't explain why, what do you want them to hear today?
Hmm. For someone who's always been different, felt different, what do I want them to hear?
Hmm.
Oh man, I mean, I'm feeling that with them because that's how I felt uh, for for a large portion of my life. Um, but what I've learned through this like self exploration uh, is that the more I am true to myself and the more authentic I am, and the more I lean into what I think is different, the more I learn that there's people who accept me, and then I meet and I find the people who are like me. And then I learned that, okay, it's still different from them, right? Because we all have our own unique experiences, but there's enough shared experiences to show that like I I can share this experience and other people have experienced it similarly to me.
Yeah. And we've talked a little bit about through your experience slash what we've just kind of seen culturally in society. If you could change one thing about how society understands neurodivergence now, what would it be?
Oh my God, that is Julie hitting me with the hardest
I
question.
know.
I have to pick one.
I mean, we have time. We can go through a few, but
Okay. Oh man, like there's so okay, one oh, man, things that I would love to be different. I so like there's so much again, this like also special neurodivergence is another special interest of mine. So like I'm reading about the history of neurodivergence. I'm gonna like
Mhm.
understand and try and look at like how I wish and I want people to stop being scared of the word diversity. And I want them to understand that neurodiversity and diversity in general, not just neurodiversity, is so chronically important to helping the world operate better because there's so much history that we can identify really important, prominent people throughout history who were neurodivergent and the great impact they've had on bettering society, bettering technology. There's so much benefit to neurodiversity and to being neurodivergent. We're extremely creative. We're really great problem solvers. We're really good at like visualizing and thinking outside of the box and for like adapting and simplifying systems and pattern recognition. We have so many strengths, so many things that are so cool about us that if we could just make a shift in this whole entire system that we're operating in to be more neuro-inclusive, whether that's like giving more space for learning styles in education and being more supportive of alternate learning styles and learning abilities. In the workplace, being more strength based focused and adapting more of the social model and strength based model in how we support employees. If we were to get rid of some of this like rigidity of these like nuanced ideas that like really at the end of the day don't make sense. Like, why do we need to go to an office from 9 to 5 every day? If like your work's getting done, your work's getting done. I will die on that hill. But if we just took a more neuro-inclusive stance
Yeah,
on all of these systems, wow, what a world we could live in.
absolutely. I I think that is such a huge takeaway. Differences are what makes people amazing.
Yeah.
Um, I want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. This has been amazing. Like you said, I feel like we could talk about this forever. We'll have to do another episode, absolutely, to get into some nitty gritty elements of what we've discussed. But before we wrap up, I want to also just give you a second. If people want to learn more about you, about your practice, where can they find you?
Ooh. You can find me at thewavecounseling.com. That's my website. Or you can find me on TikTok and Instagram at bailey.adhdtherapist. And you can also find me on LinkedIn.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again. We appreciate you coming on the podcast, and thanks everybody for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this episode. You can find us at your usual platforms. Please be sure to like and subscribe. And if you would prefer, you can also watch this episode on YouTube in addition to listening to the episode on Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you like to go. So thank you again, Bailey, for joining us, and we will see everybody in the next one.